The day was cold, with a heavy mist hanging over the landscape as David made his way home from school. His footsteps echoed on the long, lonely dirt road that led him back to the small farmhouse where he lived with his family. His mind wandered, as it often did, to the dreams that seemed so far out of reach. Dreams of owning his own horse, dreams of a better life, dreams of something more than the small, worn-down world he had always known. The road was long and the air heavy, with a sense of something forgotten, a quiet feeling, as though the earth itself was mourning some lost thing. But then, something caught his eye. A faint movement off in the distance. A figure, barely visible through the mist, barely even alive. The sight stopped him in his tracks. At first, David thought it was a trick of the fog. But as he drew closer, he realized it wasn't a trick at all. It was a horse. No, it was a shadow of a horse. The creature stood there, its once glorious coat now a dull, dirty grey, with ribs sharply visible beneath thin skin. The horse's legs were shaky, its eyes hollow and clouded with exhaustion. David's heart sank. He had seen many animals on the outskirts of town. Wild creatures that roamed the fields, horses that lived free, their coats gleaming in the sun. But this was something entirely different. A horse abandoned and left to die. A horse that had been forsaken by the world. David stepped forward cautiously, his heartbeat thudding in his chest. What kind of world would leave a living creature like this behind? He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. His young heart burned with the need to help, but the boy in him also felt fear. This was not just an abandoned animal. This was a creature on the verge of death. For a moment, David hesitated. His hands trembled as he reached out. But then, he saw it. The horse's eyes. Sunken, tired, hopeless eyes. The moment their gazes met, it was as though time slowed down. The horse, this creature of nature, stared at David with a kind of silent plea. It wasn't just hunger that the horse felt. It was a desperation that spoke louder than any words could. David swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. Without thinking, he stepped forward and placed a hand on the horse's neck. The warmth of its body, though faint, reassured him. The horse was still alive, still breathing, still there. But barely. "Hey there," David murmured, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. He didn't know what to say. There were no words for this. He didn't have any experience with horses, much less a horse that was on the brink of death. But somehow, in that moment, he made a decision. This horse, this broken creature, would not be left alone. He spent the next several minutes trying to coax the horse into standing, speaking softly to it, gently nudging its frail body. The horse responded, lifting its head slightly, though it barely had the strength to stay upright. "Don't worry, I'm here. I'll help you," David whispered, more to himself than to the animal. But the words felt true. The promise he made to that fragile creature was something he could hold on to. The days that followed were a blur of activity. David knew that he couldn't leave the horse out there in the field, slowly wasting away. There was no time to lose. Without his father's knowledge, David didn't want to worry him. He returned the following morning, determined to bring the horse back to the farm. Using the little resources he had, David managed to lead the horse back to his family's property. His father had a small stable, but there wasn't much else. Still, it would be enough, he hoped. "David, what is this?" his father asked when he saw his son return with the broken horse. His voice was rough, filled with concern, but also a trace of disbelief. He looked at the creature skeptically, seeing only a half-dead animal that seemed beyond saving. "This horse. He needs us, Dad. He's been left to die out there, please," David pleaded, his voice shaking. His father stared at him, his eyes softening slightly. After a long pause, he nodded, but David could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't think the horse would make it. Over the next few weeks, David dedicated himself entirely to the horse. He named the animal Echo, a name that resonated with him as a symbol of life, the life that still remained, echoing through the fragile creature's existence. At first, Echo refused to eat. His body had grown so weak from starvation that he had no appetite. David had to feed him by hand, encouraging him to drink water and chew on soft hay. Every step was a battle, every moment filled with fear that he might lose the horse before he could help him. But slowly, David began to see changes. Echo started to regain a little bit of strength. His legs, though shaky at first, began to support his weight. His coat, once dull and patchy, started to show signs of life. Small patches of rich brown fur were emerging, signaling that the healing process had begun. It was clear this was not going to be an easy journey, but it was a journey worth fighting for. The days were long and the nights were even longer. David spent countless hours sitting beside Echo, speaking softly to him, brushing his coat, making sure he was comfortable. The bond between them grew stronger each day, the once broken horse beginning to trust David. And David in turn began to trust in the process, in the slow but undeniable transformation unfolding before him. Echo's body began to respond in ways that David hadn't dared to imagine. With each passing day, the once skeletal horse was becoming stronger, more alert. His eyes, once clouded with pain and fear, began to brighten, showing signs of intelligence and curiosity. He started moving around the stable with more ease, stretching his legs and testing his strength. But it wasn't just physical change. There was a noticeable shift in Echo's demeanor. Once fearful and withdrawn, the horse started approaching David whenever he entered the stable. His head would raise slightly, his nostrils flaring, and his ears would twitch toward David's voice. It was as if the horse was realizing, slowly but surely, that he wasn't alone anymore. David felt a deep sense of gratitude, a quiet joy growing in his heart as he realized that the horse wasn't just healing in body, but in spirit. Echo had been given a chance to live, to trust again, to be loved. And yet, there were setbacks. Echo would have moments of relapse, times when he refused to eat or would retreat to the corner of the stable, his eyes filled with sadness. David knew that healing wasn't linear. It was a path filled with obstacles. But David wasn't going to give up. Not now, not when Echo had come so far. In those moments of doubt, David would sit beside the horse, talking to him about everything and nothing. He would remind Echo that they were in this together. Months passed, and Echo's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. He had filled out, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, his muscles thickening as he ran and played in the small pasture behind David's house. His once feeble frame was now powerful, strong enough to carry the weight of his spirit and body alike. David had been working with Echo for nearly a year now, and the two were inseparable. But there was one thing left to prove, one final test that would solidify Echo's transformation. One spring morning, David saddled Echo for the first time. The young boy was nervous but excited, hoping to see how far Echo had come. He mounted carefully, feeling the powerful animal beneath him. Echo stood still for a moment, his body tense, as if unsure what to do. Then, with a deep breath, David nudged him forward. With a sudden burst of energy, Echo surged forward. The ground beneath him seemed to disappear as the wind rushed past David's face. They were a blur of motion, a force of nature. David and Echo, moving together in perfect harmony. "Landing, Lord!" Ennis yelled. For the first time since David had found Echo in the field, the two of them were truly free. At last, the bright light attracted their attention. As they galloped across the pasture, David's heart swirled with emotion. This was the moment. This was the true transformation. Echo wasn't just a horse now. He was a symbol of strength, survival, and resilience. He had come from the brink of death, and together they had risen. The boy and the horse ran side by side, both powerful, both free, both reborn. Now,